So there isn't any action item here, but we're just going to give you an update. Mayor, we have another gentleman who's going to come from the Army Corps. He thought that we were going to do this at the end. So,
well,
Okay.
let's do it in bits and pieces. I can do the whole, his part.
I bet you can.
What I was thinking about doing is Leslie had specifically requested the CIP, and she's stuck in traffic and should be here shortly. And I thought that we could have public comments related to the Upper Bay dredging project in advance.
It's a roll call, Leslie's absent.
And we're now calling for public comments.
Are you ready for me?
Yes, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mayor Webb, council members. I'm Tom Rossmiller, manager of the Harbor Resources Division, and I'm going to present to you a short slideshow on the Upper Newport Bay Ecosystem Restoration Project, which is finally going to start construction. It's been many years in the making, and we're really excited that we have Oriana Duranzik with the contractor DDM here with us this evening, and they're getting ready to put their dredge in the water next week. And Tony Risco with the Army Corps of Engineers is on his way. He's stuck in traffic also. So I'm going to get right into it.
Okay, if we could possibly, how long do you think this will take? 10 minutes?
About 10 to 15 minutes.
Okay, because we need to try to wrap it up. How long is your CIP going to take?
Are those 10 Rossmiller minutes?
40 minutes will work.
That's it.
Okay, we need to try to see if we can wrap this up by 25 after.
Okay. Quickly for the viewers, the project is upstream of Pacific Coast Highway Bridge, and it starts with dredging a channel to the Middle Island as the first phase of the project. We're dredging around Middle Island on this side here to create a channel on that side where there has been one historically but isn't one now, and allows for predators to get over into the nesting areas. So we are going to try and eliminate predator access to a number of islands and problem areas in the harbor.
Can I ask, does that mean that they can walk across?
They can walk across at low tide.
You could too, but you'd get caught in the mud. You win.
Can I ask, when we talk about predator, coyotes, is that what we're talking about? Or
Dogs, coyotes, and foxes are the main predators that get onto the islands. A lot of folks ask, why are we concerned about sediment in Newport Bay, and especially the Back Bay anyway? And so this slide shows that it directly impacts open water habitat. I actually took this picture from the sheriff's helicopter after the 1998 big storm, and it was 3 days later, and there's still a big sediment plume coming from the upper bay into the lower bay. This is just downstream of Coast Highway Bridge, and it shows that it creates shoals in our navigation channels and slips. It limits a lot of our recreation and educational uses, and reduces the tidal circulation in the upper bay. And very importantly is it doesn't allow us to comply with sediment TMDL rules that the Regional Water Quality Control Board has established. Next, please. The project objectives are to manage the sediment deposition in the bay, to maintain a balance of estuarine habitats, And the Regional Water Quality Control Board in our TMDL tells us that we have to reduce our dredging frequency to about once every 20 years. They don't want us to disturb the habitat every 5 to 7 years as we have been for the last decade or so. They also want us to maintain water access reserve managers, and I'll show you later the least turn islands that aren't managed properly because they can't get to them. We want to increase tidal circulation in stagnant waters of the Upper Bay. I talked about the predators, and of course we want to improve public use and access and recreational and educational opportunities in the Upper Bay. Of course, with any project, you have a number of constraints, and the resource agencies told us that we had to avoid any net loss of salt marsh habitat. So we had to do this restoration project and not lose any of the vegetation. And we had to limit future changes to all habitat types. Regional board tells us we can't change the habitat types more than 1% in the project, and we can't change the mudflats by more than 10%. And we can't allow for the advance of one habitat at the cost of another. And of course, we have to minimize the disturbance to wildlife while we're doing the project. The project goes for about 400 working days, so that's going to be a big challenge not to disturb the wildlife.
Tom, quick question on the mudflat, not changing it by 10%. Are you taking into consideration the non-construction of the mudflat next to the Newport Aquatic Center?
Yes, we are. We have an alternative to that.
Okay. You have an alternative mudflat site?
Yes.
Okay.
Briefly, the project features are to expand and deepen the in-bay basins to -20. That's these two basins up here. This is Jamboree Bridge over here. There's a least turn island that exists here now. We're going to move it over to this location where it's closer to the foraging area for the least turn. We want to increase the open water area by about 19 acres in both Unit 1/3 and Unit 2 basin. We also are going to dredge close to 1 million cubic yards out of the 1/3 basin and close to 900,000 cubic yards in the Unit 2 basin.
I noticed that you still have in red the area that's next to the Newport Aquatic Center. I thought that we were relocating that to another location.
We are, and that's an optional item that has not been awarded. We're working on a design for the alternate location at 23rd Street right now.
Okay.
Yes.
I thought they were putting it at 14th Street.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Right under my coat. That's right. Memory is slow.
Zooming through that. Well, quickly, I'll say that some of the other features that we're doing in the ecosystem restoration channel is to build these side channels around the islands so that they truly are islands again. We're going to remove some old dredge spoils on Shellmaker Island, and we're going to work on segmenting the dike here so that it prevents access to some of the prime nesting sites up in this area of the Upper Bay. I mentioned that we were going to move the least turn island over to where the old dike used to be, and we're going to also dig this channel around the island in addition to digging these basins deeper. Just thought we'd show the viewing audience what some of the endangered species of concern are. You hear a lot of discussion about the light-footed clapperel and the least turn. and these are just some pictures for that. Project costs are split 65% federal, 35% non-federal. Total project is about $39.2 million, including engineering and design. The federal cost is $25.5 million. Non-federal, including LERDs, is $13.7 million. LERDs is lands, easements, right-of-ways, disposal, and another R. So they give us about $700,000 credit for that above the $13 million that the Coastal Conservancy has provided to us in grants. The formal sponsors on the non-federal side are the county and Department of Fish and Game, and future maintenance and operation of the Upper Bay is 100% local costs. The feds are out of it once this project is constructed, and our numerical model shows that without a series of big El Nino years, we should be able to not have to repeat this project for another 21 years. The contract was awarded to DDM in September 2005. We have a base contract that's about $11 million with about $5 million in options. We're going to start physical construction in about 2 weeks. We should see the dredge delivered on the 21st, I think is the date we're looking at right now. The period for construction is about 400 working days.
Is this a 24/7 project?
It is a 24/7 project for 6 days a week. They're not allowed to work Sundays and holidays.
So it's 24/6.
Excuse me, 24/6.
Thank you.
Sorry.
But they're not working straight through the 400 days, right? This is like a 3-year project?
This first phase is awarded for 400 days. There will be future phases.
So the future phases are more, but that's not the whole $39 million. That's
Right. It's just the $17 million
Thank
on
you.
this first phase.
400 days is roughly a year and a half.
Correct.
Tom, are you saying that they can accommodate not disturbing the habitat by working 24/6?
There's certain days, certain areas where they have to keep a distance off of the nest sites, and they have to have a monitor in place to make sure that there are no losses. When I did the last dredging project, we had a lease turn nesting monitor that watched, and if we had 3 takes, the project would be shut down. A take could be considered a broken egg if a lease turn flew off of the nest and broke the egg because of noise. So we're required to do that intensive of monitoring. I talked about some of the features already. The mud flats at 23rd Street was part of that project to do the mud flat gain there instead of at the North Star Beach location next to Dover Shores. And I've talked about that already. Tony was just going to talk about what those features were in a little more detail. I'll skip over that to save some time. And then I'll describe the equipment quickly and then hand it over to Ariana. They're going to bring in a 10-inch hydraulic pipeline dredge, 2 tugboats, 2 3,000 cubic yard disposal scows, a survey vessel, and a discharge pipeline. And Ariana's going to describe that for you.
So this isn't a crane bucket dredging project. This is a purely hydraulic one.
Not so far. Future phases, maybe.
Okay.
Good evening. I'm Oriana Dranzik with DDM Crane and Rigging. We're the general contractor for the first phase of the Upper Newport Bay project. And I was just going to go over some of the equipment that we're going to be bringing here, since it's going to be the most visible part of the project for the general public, seeing it go through the lower bay. It's us. This is the dredge. It's actually was built for DREDGING. It's the dredging subcontractor. It's in New Orleans now. It actually shipped out today. We're expecting delivery next Tuesday of it. They named it the Pelican. And those are the dimensions on it. It's actually a pretty small dredge.
So is this equipment made specifically for this dredge project?
We built it, or Dutra built it specifically for this dredge project, yeah. It was started production in October. Next. Those are the buoyancy floats that they're going to be constructing in the Newport dunes starting next week. That dredge actually will get shipped separately, and then they'll bolt it together onto those. I just wanted to put a picture of what it'll look like once it's in operation. That isn't the dredge we'll be using. That's a dredge that we used recently on a Belmarine Keys project in Northern California. It's the discharge pipeline. On the Upper Bay project, it'll be discharging into the 3,000 cubic yard scows. In this picture, it's discharging into a containment area. And that's the DS5. One of the 3,000 cubic yard scows, as you can see, they're rather big. It's 258 feet by 48 feet wide. So those will be going through the lower bay to the offshore disposal site. So people will be seeing those a lot.
What depth do they draw? Is that the 18 feet deep, or
It drafts.
draft?
When it's full, it'll be about 12 feet. When it's empty, it drafts about 4.5.
So that you probably going to be operating at high tide when you're going out the bridge and all that kind of
The
stuff.
low tide, yeah.
Well,
To get under the bridge, yes.
to get under the bridge, okay.
Then
You don't have much room underneath.
we won't really fill it past.
And you are aware of the water line that goes underneath there.
We're aware.
Where exactly is the material going to be
It's
deposited?
LA3.
I'm sorry?
The majority of it, or the stuff that'll be going in these scows, is going offshore to LA3.
May I explain where that is?
It's about 4 miles, I guess, southwest of the entrance to the Newport Bay.
It's almost directly off. It's a site that we fought for years, and Dave will show it to you.
It's down in that area there, if you look at the map on the wall.
I follow the past scows out there and watch them dump it. It's a big nothing when it happens, by the way.
We actually have a lovely picture of one of them dumping in the next slide. It's the DS6. They're actually identical scows, but that's what it'll look like when it's disposing offshore. So,
Does that carries your both the dirt and the water that you're bringing up?
yes.
So then you just bring, so what fraction is dirt and what fraction is water that you're?
We're hoping, idealistically, to get maybe 1,000 cubic yards of sediment for 2,000 cubic yards of water. Realistically, it'll probably be between 500 and 800.
I have one technical question.
Sure.
What kind of velocities do you have in your piping?
Velocities.
Do you know?
They said it was,
Feet per second kind of thing or something like that?
I think it's,
So if it's really fine, you can operate at lower speeds.
yeah, the specs, I think it's 3,500 gallons a minute.
So for a 10-inch, you're
Yeah,
saying?
yeah.
And do you have an erosion? Does that, I mean, I've seen in some of the sewage disposal works where they're running through piping every 10 days. Do you also have to replace that on a very frequent interval?
From the abrasion of the material going through?
Yeah.
It shouldn't, most of this stuff should go through. There's so much water per sediment that,
You're using a steel piping or
It's
Dick,
plastic?
we are limited in time. If you would like to, I'm sure they will be glad to talk about the details of piping and pumping later on, please.
this is the small workboat. This will be in the upper bay, assisting the scows and crew change and the assembly of the pipe. It's the Briscoe tug that'll be towing those large scows through the lower bay to the offshore disposal site. And this is our survey boat, which they'll see probably in the upper and lower bay. They're doing the hydrographic surveying for our dredge.
Now, you do have an accurate GPS system to where you know where LA
Yep.
dump site is,
Yep.
right?
All of that's actually required to be tracked by, we're having a firm, E-Track Engineering is doing all the tracking for us, so it's pretty much live time. You can download where the load went. It's got bin sensors to make sure that none of it leaked on the way, and it can be downloaded by the public to anybody can look at it.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Are we just about finished?
I think we are, Mr. Mayor and council members.
Are there any questions on the project at the present time?
Do we have 1 minute to ask a question?
Got 1 minute.
No, I mean, I don't know what the other presentation, CIP, Leslie's not here. Tom, can you just give us, I know you're going to do it next time, a comment on the lower bay potential dredging, and I don't think enough communication to our citizens is going to be enough. I mean,
Sure.
There are too many boats that are hanging up at low tide right now.
In the lower bay, we currently have a need to dredge about 900,000 cubic yards to bring the lower bay back to the original design depths that the Army Corps had originally built in the bay. We're proposing to do a project with the Army Corps that would dredge approximately 400,000 cubic yards in the worst areas of the bay. Those being the Anchorage and Turning Basin between Lido and Balboa Islands, the main channel going back to the Turning Basin at Lido Marina Village, and the main channel going out towards the harbor entrance, and then the channel between Balboa Island and Beacon Bay are all parts of this next phase of dredging that we're asking the Army Corps to perform. We met with the Colonel and his staff last week with
Colonel or General?
Colonel.
This is a colonel.
Okay.
And Colonel is the district commander at Los Angeles. The General is the division commander in San Francisco. The Colonel liked the strategy that we presented to him on how to get the dredging done with some kickstart from work that we've done. As you know, we're working with the Army Corps of Engineers in renewing our regional general permit for dredging between the pierhead and the bulkhead. And in doing that, we came across problems with survival of amphipods, little critters that live in the mud. And our consultants developed a solution that was accepted by EPA and which stopped the last phase of the Army Corps of Engineers project. So now that we have a solution developed, we're going to work with our consultant in the Army Corps in getting their project re-permitted and shelf-ready for us to lobby hard for some money.
Okay, well, they can transfer from a different project, can they not?
Right. We think that if we have a shelf-ready project that there is typically money left over towards the end of the year for projects that don't get permits for whatever reason, and that the money can be transferred into Newport Bay because it's ready to go.
How close to shelf-ready are we?
We have preliminary design worked out. We've made all the plan sheets. We just need to marry the plan sheets to the specifications and do some more of the testing that we need to get the amphipod testing approved by EPA.
Thank you. Anybody else have anything?
Is some of that sand of a quality that we could get on our beach down there?
Unfortunately, it's not. It's all fine-grained material,
It's all
and
fine.
it'll go out to the LA3 disposal
Now,
site.
some of that along the inlet is of quality that can be used, right?
That's correct, but there isn't any more of the sand quality material within the area that the Army Corps has responsibility for.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's get back to the regular agenda of, first thing on the agenda, clarifications of item on the consent calendar. Mr. Nichols, do you have anything on the consent calendar that you need to have questions about? Items 1 through 6.
Well, I had a question that I'm going to either pull the thing or something, but I'd like to know what our alternatives on some of the sea lion related ordinances are. And secondly, that's number 3 and 4. I'd like to understand what that Bay Avenue drainage is. To have some description of it.
Okay.
Well,
It's the
What is
installation
the,
of a storm drain in Lindo Avenue. Isn't that correct, Mr. Batum?
Yeah, that's correct, and along with that is a lot of street work that we've been putting off because of that drainage. As you
Where
may
is
be-
this?
Bay Avenue in the vicinity of Lindo, Island, and Buena Vista is an area that's historically had some pretty poor street drainage because of flat grades. And we're actually going to be able to install a drainage system in there that should handle their needs in that area, and as well as an opportunity for us to finally repave those areas.
Is that on the peninsula?
It's
or-
on the
That's on the
peninsula. Do you
peninsula.
know where Bay Island is?
it's actually directly behind the fire station and the library. That's
There you go.
exactly where it is.
Is that correct? Yeah, so it's not in Corona Del Mar at all.
No, I understand that.
Okay.
Yeah, so stay off my peninsula.
Stay off your peninsula.
I'm just kidding, Dick.
Okay, did you have anything else on, is that enough of an answer on that one for you?
That's enough of an answer on that one.
Okay. Mr. Ridgway?
Just a comment, Mr. Mayor. We did have public comments, and I don't think you asked if there were more public comments, so I
From the
just...
public, you're right. But I don't see any public here yet. so-
Well,
Okay. My oversight. Mr. Rosansky?
None, thank you.
Mr. Selledge?
Nothing.
Mr.
Nothing.
Curry? Good. And I have nothing. So the next item is a presentation on the CIP process by Mr. Batum, and you have 28 minutes.
Okay, we'll try to be really brief and quick. First, before I start, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to introduce Jamie Pollard, who's our new administrative manager for the Public Works Department, and she'll be responsible for pulling all of this information together, culminating in a very nice CIP book, which will show what we're going to do in the next fiscal year.
Welcome aboard, Jamie.
We'll go through this rather quickly because of the time, but just feel free to jump in at any time if you have any questions. Once again, it's that time of year. We're getting ready for the next fiscal year, and we're looking at the new capital program, and we're going to give you some information on how that process works. Just to give you a little background, we have a little chart here that shows kind of the history. There's a few ups and downs, but in general, it's always increasing. And as you can see, last year we were over the $25 million mark.
Steve, was that the Arches Bridge, that the high years there?
Yeah, I think those were the larger projects like Arches and MacArthur widening, those kinds of bridges.
Certain give the mayor his credit.
You had
Yes.
a public works director that was very ambitious that year.
Yeah. The next slide shows briefly the budget calendar, and as you can see, we started back in December asking for all of the city departments to start thinking about capital projects and putting in their submittals. As you can see on the schedule, we're right close to the point where we'll have our preliminary screening and compiling of requests done. And then over the next couple of weeks, we'll be looking at meeting with all the departments to review these projects and get more information about them. And ultimately, we'll compile a preliminary list of projects for the city manager's review, and we'll submit them to him early in March. We'll also have some preliminary review requests with the city manager and department representatives, where we sit down and actually go through the projects, and the departments have an opportunity to discuss their needs. And then ultimately, we'll bring it back to a study session, the city council, early in May, to kind of present where where our preliminary budget is looking at, our preliminary capital plan. And then that starts the process of meeting with council members and determining which projects need to move forward, or other projects that might want to be added, or projects that might be easily deferred to other years, and ultimately culminating in a couple of budget hearings for your approval. The CIP program is really driven by funding sources. The availability of funds really drives what we can actually do. And as you can see here, we've listed most of the funds, and this is how our budget booklet is broken up as well. General fund, tide and submerged lands, special sources, water and sewer enterprise funds, and then cooperative projects, which compile various tax or gas tax contributions, all sorts of funding programs that we have. The general fund is pretty much generated from the property tax, sales tax, fees, and other miscellaneous sources. And this is really the main fund where we look at facilities, drainage, parks, and communication, neighborhood enhancement, and all sorts of miscellaneous projects that can't be funded under restricted funding sources. We have a couple of special funds within the general fund, the neighborhood enhancement funds, which the 2 zones that were created on the peninsula, which actually have half of the parking revenues that are dedicated to capital projects in those zones. There's one in West Newport and one farther out on the peninsula, and those come from the parking meter revenue. Then we also have the oceanfront encroachment program, which are the fees that we charge folks for using portions of the beach, and that was by the Coastal Commission action. And 85% of those fees that we generate have to go towards projects that promote public beach access or visitor-serving amenities. And overall, the general fund this year, the target's going to be $5 million. The next fund is tide and submerged lands, and essentially it's all the funds generated within the tides and submerged lands, property tax, sales tax, same as general fund, but in those areas, pier, mooring fees, leases, the city oil wells, the beach parking lots, and miscellaneous services that occur in that zone. And as might be expected, the money generated in those areas have to be reinvested into those areas. So we're looking at about $1.6 million to be targeted in the tide and submerged lands. Then we have the special sources. Generally revenue generated by special tax or other programs like building excise tax, CDBG, Community Development Block Grant, and the redevelopment agency. Now, the redevelopment agency isn't really ours yet, but we're kind of working on that. The BET funds are generated from residential, commercial, and building. These are fees that they pay for modifications and improvements, and they go toward, they're specifically designated towards fire stations, fire equipment, libraries, and parks. And it's a very small amount, and it's something we probably ought to look at one of these days, is trying to increase that, but there's only $200,000 available in that particular fund. Normally we get CDBG funds that are federal funds that are apportioned to qualifying cities but through the county, and they're essentially restricted to blighted areas or ADA access and those kinds of projects. However, this year we're not going to have any money in that fund because we're using all of our CDBG funds that go towards the repayment of the loan that we used to build Balboa Village. And then the Santa Ana Heights Redevelopment Agency funds are generated from the tax increment from the designated area, which is the Santa Ana Heights. And it's under county control, as you know, right now. We know there's about $30 million of backlog projects in there. And ultimately, we hope to be able to start delivering those projects to the folks in Santa Ana Heights. And those projects include Fire Station 7 and the Future Community Center.
I know we have some accumulated increment already from that agency that's sort of on deposit. What's the annual revenue flow of the increment estimated to be?
Right now, it's about $10 million, and that includes the housing set-aside. But there is also debt service that comes off of that, and also bankruptcy debt that comes off of that. So what the net is after all of those, including administration, are taken out, the county gets about $1.5 million right now to use for projects.
The next two funds are essentially user funds, pretty self-explanatory, water enterprise and sewer enterprise that come from the fees. Apparently, obviously that fees generated will go back into those. Typical programs we have are designed out of the master plans. We have a master plan for water and for sewer, and so we have a lot of projects that are already in the pipeline ready to go that are designated to occur in certain years. This particular year we have additional monies of $1.4 million in the water fund and a $600,000 in the sewer fund. We have cooperative projects, which include various projects, various funds, gas tax, Measure M. Gas tax is a portion based of the gasoline tax statewide based on our highway miles within the city. It must be used for transportation purposes, and historically we've used it to leverage state, federal, and Measure M competitive grant programs. We have about $2.8 million in that fund this year. Measure M, which is very similar to gas tax, but it's the half-cent sales tax from the initiative that ends in 2010. We're hoping it gets reauthorized in this next election. But that, we get a local turnback share, which is automatic based upon our highway miles and population. And that also must be used for transportation purposes. And like gas tax, we also use that to leverage our grant programs. We're looking at $2.4 million in local turnback this year, and we're going to try to leverage that into more grant funding as we can. That kind of leads us to grants and contributions. They're essentially project-specific funding available. We look at all kinds of funds that are out there. We have the federal T program right now. We're working through the state for other programs. We also get monies through HOAs that are willing to put up a share of a project. The business improvement districts quite often put up contributions. And we also get straight donations, which also generate projects. Transportation and circulation are essentially the funds we generate from traffic impact fees. They're designated for congestion relief and some safety improvement projects such as the intersection improvements, roadway widenings, channelization, signal improvements, pedestrian crossing improvements. And we're expecting that we'll be able to collect about $1.1 million in revenue this year.
Yeah, don't those have to be spent exclusively on our circulation system streets?
Yeah, those are go strictly to arterial highways, yes.
So they can't be spent on
They can't be spent on local streets, yeah. So where do the projects come from? Essentially, departmental observation. That's one of the ways where we get projects. Other folks, other departments will notice things over the years: deteriorated playgrounds, deteriorated roadways, things that need to be taken care of. Citizen input is also another area where we get a lot of information, and quite often that citizen input comes through council members. It comes from individuals, HOAs, bids, etc., and those generate projects as well. As I stated, our master plans that we have for sewer, water, drainage, and pavement generate projects that have to be done on a program in order to keep up with the quality of our infrastructure. Quite often we do studies that also generate projects. We'll do a feasibility study of something that the council might want to look at, and next thing you know, it's generating a potential project. It might be a traffic study as well.
Buck Gully or something like that.
Buck Gully's a perfect example of that, yes. Community workshops, quite often, as in Balboa Village, was generated essentially from council member Ridgway pulling the community together and saying, hey, what do we want to do about Central Balboa? And so certainly a lot of projects came out of that. And we're doing a similar process in West Newport and, of course, Corona Del Mar, which I didn't put on there. But the selection process involves funding availability. And one of the big issues is that each fund, as you can see by our overview, is restricted to certain uses. So we have to balance that based upon the availability. We also try to match these projects to appropriate funding sources. Obviously, road projects go to gas tax, and general fund might fund a building or facility replacement. We look very seriously at the cost benefit of each project. We kind of do a project triage. What we do is we look at what projects we would consider must-do projects and separate them from the wouldn't it be nice projects. Other factors that affect the priority are public safety. Obviously, we have to take care of public safety issues when they arise. Infrastructure that's failing or about to fail or looks very close to doing so. Certainly community interest. If we have a lot of community interest in a particular area or a problem that needs to be resolved or a facility that needs to be built, that helps us establish that priority. When we have matching funding that leverages our city funds, those kinds of projects get a priority. Continuation projects that are essentially ongoing commitments we place on a higher priority. Quite often we do a project that is phased over several years. We may make a promise to the community, or the council may promise the community to follow through on several phases of a project, so we give priority to those projects even if the council member's off the council. Regulations, quite often we have to develop projects because of regulatory issues. MPDES, water quality are perfect examples of that. Master plan projects, of course, are very important that they have priority. In the big picture, if we don't follow our master plan, we're going to be in danger of getting far behind on our infrastructure quality. And so if we deferred a bunch of street repavement projects, we would get very far behind and we may never catch up. So it's important to give those master plan projects priority. And we also look at community equity and impacts. We try not to put too much work in one section of town just because of the impacts that would happen to the citizens. If we're tearing up Jamboree Road every other week, folks get angry. And obviously we want to try to space that out if we can. Unfortunately, just like remodeling your home, every project has a little bit of pain, but hopefully the outcome is worth that pain. But we try to spread the pain around, I guess. The next part that's really critical here is our CIP scheduling. We look at the potential scheduling with the staff, and we look at things like potential disruption to the public. Obviously, we don't want to do a project that needs to happen down near downtown Balboa in the middle of summer. We try to work around things like the boat parade. We try to work around events that may happen, or we know that major events. Obviously, we're not going to tear up an area right before the big centennial celebration. So that's important to our scheduling. And there's environmental requirements, as we just heard from our folks that are doing work in the Back Bay. There's always environmental requirements that may affect the scheduling. Certain times of the year we may not be able to do work in various areas, so we have to work around that. We also have weather considerations. Certain types of work require very good weather. When you're laying rubberized asphalt or slurry seal, you want to have fairly warm weather. You don't want to do it in between rainstorms in the winter. And also there's funding requirements. Several programs that we get grants often expire at a certain date, so the scheduling is important to those projects to get those completed or at least underway before that funding might expire. We also look at our proposed CIP staffing. The projects are assigned to project managers with available man-hours and expertise in mind. Just to remind you, the Public Works CIP division is supervised by the city engineer, and he has 6 engineers to manage roughly over 100 projects each year. The construction team in the Public Works Department has 4 inspectors now, and 1 is dedicated essentially to outside encroachment permit projects. So you can see that limits their time. If the project hours exceed available man hours, we hire temporary contract employees, or we use outside consulting firms. And also that projects that require specialized expertise also get contracted out to engineering consultants. And here, although it's hard to see, is kind of an example of the scheduling we do. We do a master project schedule. And we try to accomplish this at the same time we put the CIP together to kind of figure out, are we going to be able to, once we promise you a CIP, we want to be able to deliver it. So we look at, you can kind of see the blue is design, the triangle is award, and the red is construction. And there's a couple of green in there too, I think, for getting permits. So you can see there are several projects there, and we try to stagger them so one project manager can manage those projects. Each project manager gets anywhere from 10 to 15 projects assigned to them in a fiscal year.
Those project managers are really managing consultants that do design work, so very little is actually designed in-house.
That is true. In fact, most of the work does get contracted out. Only the very simple projects that are cost-effective to be done in-house really get done by our own staff. And that kind of concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Does anybody on the council have a question they'd like to ask? Mr. Zelich.
I remember a number of years ago vaguely seeing like a 5 or 7 year capital improvement program. Do we still do that, or did I not?
I think what you're referring to is part of the OCTA requirement in order to stay eligible for OCTA funds. We submit what we call our 7-year CIP program. And what that is kind of an educated guess of what kinds of projects we might be doing over the next 7 years. We typically bring that list to you for approval each time we have to get certified by OCTA, which I believe is every 2 years.
But that's a CIP of just the road project.
That is just the road projects for the arterial highways, and that doesn't include local streets.
Does that include things like sidewalks and curbs and gutters and stuff like that, or just?
It only includes, projects that would affect, traffic capacity, like widenings and intersection improvements. Wouldn't handle sidewalk replacements and those kinds of things.
But Steve would have a pretty good idea for utilities, for water and sewer because of our master plans. But other than that, we really don't have any master plans for like sidewalks and retaining walls and park projects.
That's correct.
Have we ever done like an assessment of all of the older areas of the city in terms of the condition of all the underground infrastructure, water, sewer lines, things like that?
Well, our water master plan, our sewer master plan does exactly that.
That's all the lines, not just the main transmission lines?
That's everything we own.
With the exception of house laterals.
Right, the exception of the laterals.
Right. Everything
we do have
that the
that
city owns.
televised capability of going into the lines and seeing what its condition is for sewer lines. So that's a very effective tool for us.
Well, and there are two systems. There's a city sewer line, and then there's the Orange County Sanitation, which is different, but they have that on an asset management also.
So through that, do we have a pretty good handle on what the condition of all the lines are?
Yeah, we
Because I know
do.
some cities that have old lines like that, they don't know what they have or what they don't have.
Well, I would suggest, being a new council member, that if you were to sit down with the utilities Director Antista, he could go through and give you a rough idea of what the next 15 years worth of replacements. But we are going through and replacing on an annual basis a fairly substantial number of our transmission lines. And then as we get into the older areas, we're doing the smaller lines too. So that really, I think we have a pretty good handle on that. The sewer system down in the peninsula was originally constructed with concrete pipe, and almost all of that has been replaced over the last 20 to 25 years. Just started biting off bits and pieces, and so that we have our sewer services have been reconstructed as needed, and we're really in pretty good shape as far as those lines are concerned.
In addition to that master plan, the other thing that we quite often do is if we're doing work, and let's say we're doing some major repaving in a street or an alley, we always review the age of those utility lines and we got to make a judgment call on whether it might be appropriate to do that now, so we don't have to tear up this alley or that street.
If you look, for instance, if you look at our water atlas, most of your main transmission mains have a date of construction on it, and so it's pretty easy to draw the conclusion, while I'm going through and paving this, this was installed in 1925. If we haven't had any problems on it, then you would look at a few sections, and if they're okay, fine. If not, then you can start replacing it.
And one last comment, our water and sewer rates have a built-in factor for the sewer and water master plans in order to help make sure that we can fund what we need.
Mr. Mayor, actually, just a follow-up to that, because we have these master plans, I think we have adequate information and data in the computer that basically says how old the system is, where the weak points are. I would say that Orange County Sanitation District is, they're about at 80% of total asset management, where everything is computerized and has useful lives in it. I do have a question. The new Finance Committee has a list of all the assets in the city. Is that correct?
Yes, we have to have that as a part of our financing records, financial records.
Well, and that was, I do believe a couple of years ago, the rules changed under
Yes.
FASB or whatever, where we had to, Dennis had
Amortize
to
all of
amortize everything. My comment really, or my question is, do you anticipate with that Finance Committee, perhaps with Public Works input and/or citizen input, looking at all of our assets and perhaps starting to prioritize and/or, look at the total asset base, all the infrastructure that we have in the city? I mean, it's an opportune time.
We haven't done that before, and I think the move that we are making now to look 20 years down the road as far as our facilities is that same philosophy, and I think we are going to then build that into the rest of our organization as time goes on.
Yeah, I would just suggest we do. I mean, we've just kind of catch as can. I mean, buildings that are 70 years old, and certainly on the peninsula, and they're just hanging in there. But there's an opportunity here. I think you should look at expansion besides financing of that committee's scope, and I think that.
And setting aside some funds for replacement, ongoing, regular money going into funds for ongoing replacement.
Well, and I also think there's an opportunity there to look at the assets, the infrastructure, prioritize, right? I mean, you're sitting there looking at it. You might as well use the committee and/or staff time to really analyze these things.
I had one other question. I pretty well followed how you arrived at all your targets on all your funding sources, but the general fund, how did you arrive at the $5 million?
That's all the manager will give us.
Well, outside
I was going to say,
of that.
that's all they want to give me.
I could guess, but I just want to hear.
That's the answer.
That's a negotiated amount between the finance director and the city manager.
So what is it? What do? You take all the cost of operations, reserves, all of the retirement monies and all of that, and basically that's what's left over off of what your revenue projections are?
Yes. And we try and keep that at, we have kept it at 4,000, so, $4 million, so $5 million is $1 million more than we have spent, I think, in the last 6-7 years since I've been here.
Do you have like a ballpark idea of what all those numbers are, or not?
Well, I'm sorry, which numbers, though?
Well, what you're estimating the total revenue to be, and what the cost of operations are, and reserves and all that?
Yeah, I don't have them on my fingertips, but I have them in my office.
Okay, well, I was just looking for like a ballpark, if that's okay.
Wouldn't you be able to pull that out of the existing budget as a guide, just assume that it's going to be slightly higher this year and all the various different things?
And Dennis has that information.
Yeah, actually, to both new Councilman Selledge and Curry, I would clearly suggest you look at the resource allocation book even before we get into the cycle. It's thin, and it really, there's a wealth of information and knowledge in it that'll really get you going.
Good.
Mr. Mayor, if I could just ask you a question. For projects that exceed the available current year funds, what do we do? Do we bank money, or do we try and segment the project, or what do we do?
Well, I guess quite often what we do is when we have a project that is over the allocation, we generally bring it before the council and try to make a decision on whether we want to advance those funds from the reserve or scale down the project. We have several options usually that we bring to the council. In a lot of cases, though, they can't be dealt with unless we appropriate more funds.
Actually, I think that now would be a good time to say that if council members are aware of any project in their district that they would like to see added into the CIP program, it would be appropriate to inform Mr. Badum of that and let him work with you on determining cost estimates, and so that he has an opportunity to look at putting that into the priorities and making determinations as to whether or not it is at the same level as all the other projects. So I would.
Well, I'd actually been with-
It's always better to try to plan ahead rather than add things in at the last minute.
But I've been working on one for 2 years, and it's had carryover, and now it's still short. And Homer and Steve are well aware of it, but it's got to be done this year. There's just too much going on.
Well, it depends on whether the council.
I know.
More votes.
I will beg, and I will beg each and every one of you.
Well, what you have to do is Leslie had 20% of the budget last year, so you need to talk to her.
20 or 22?
22, I guess it was.
Yeah, there's a little correction there.
Okay, is there anything else, Leslie, is there anything that, since we've already discussed it before, that needed clarification on the consent calendar for you?
No, there's not, Mayor Webb.
Thank you. Well, I guess that next item is we've already done public comments, so I guess we can adjourn to closed session.
Okay.